By the way, not everything that you heard is correct, and you can, during the Q&A session and comment session, you can bring those up, you can bring those back up. It isn't true that the euro is more valuable than the dollar necessarily, and it isn't true that the U.S. is deliberately trying to cause the euro to be a weak currency so as to keep the dollar strong. That is also not true. So be able to distinguish between the caricature that is embedded in that video from the truth, which actually about 2/3 of it, speaks to. All right, so we'll get back to those issues. So now that we know a little bit about this situation, let's go into our debt situation, our national debt. All right, which actually, just so you understand, a little bit of what you saw in the video, right? Our national debt that you hear, which is about $14.5 trillion, is actually divided up into two. There's money the government borrows from us and foreigners, and also money the government lends itself. Oh yes, the government lends itself money. One government agency can lend to another government agency. So for that, we call that intra-governmental debt. Look at our debt situation over the past several years. And what you see here is that our debt situation didn't really start getting bad until sometime in the 70s. All right, after the Second World War, we had a little bit of a problem because we had to fund the Marshall Plan and all that stuff. But really, our debt situation started getting pretty bad. From the 70s. That's when this line kind of shot up in a crazy fashion. Let's come on and look at how this has changed in the recent times. Right? So here's what I did. I said, for each of these recent presidents, I'm going to find out how much they added to the U.S. debt. And you can see there that, for example, President Carter increased our debt by 33% during his reign, during his regime. Reagan was the most, approximately 160% increase in our national debt. Now, and then the others, right? Up until the most current time period, in the 1 year that Obama has been in office, it's about 34%. But now let's look at the reasons why these happened. Nothing much really happened when President Carter was in office, except for the fact that we had, you may not remember your financial and economic history, we did have an oil-driven recession and inflation in the late 70s and early 80s. In fact, it was that economic stress that made it difficult for Jimmy Carter to win re-election, added to the fact that his attempt to rescue U.S. hostages in Iran fell through. Now though, things got really dramatic when President Reagan came into office. Now, when President Reagan came into office was when the Soviet Union was at the peak of their power because they had deployed ballistics and anti-ballistics weapons in Eastern Europe, and the United States didn't really have any response for it. President Carter believed in unilateral disarmament. However, Reagan campaigned that he would match the Soviets toe-to-toe and that he would make sure that he would negotiate from a position of power, with the Soviets. And so once he came into office, he embarked on the building up of the cruise and Pershing missiles. You may not know what those are, but those are the anti-ballistics that he had to deploy in Western Europe to counter Soviet offensive. That cost billions of dollars. Secondly, also, he invested billions of dollars in what we call the Star Wars. You may have heard of that. The Star Wars was really nicknamed for SDI, Strategic Defense Initiative, that cost a lot of money during President Reagan's government. And then also, by the way, reduced taxes. All right? This country enjoyed one of the lowest tax rates when President Reagan was in charge. Now, his political opponents refer to that as trickle down because he believed that if you reduce tax rates across the board, then there'll be the incentive to invest and hire people and all that stuff. Right? However, the little fact that a lot of people don't quite know is the fact that also he eliminated most deductions from our tax code so that in the end, government was actually able to pick up more money. That would have been the case with reduced taxes. For example, all of your credit card debt would have been tax deductible, the interest you paid on it, up until 1986 when that all changed. And then, so a lot of things happened when President Reagan was in office. And then we had President Bush Sr., Desert Storm. But he didn't really pay so much money for Desert Storm for two reasons. One, because it was a very short war. And the other was also because it had the largest number of allies fighting that war. Even Syria was an ally against Saddam Hussein's Iraq in Desert Storm, by the way, in case you forgot. And the president of Syria at the time was the father of the current Syrian president that you hear about in the news, the father of President Bashar al-Assad. All right? And he actually, for one time, supported America and the rest of the world against Saddam Hussein at the time. So it didn't really cost much money. And then under President Clinton, he passed the $500 billion stimulus in 1993 to fight the George Bush Sr. era recession. Because again, there was a recession that made it difficult for President Bush to win re-election. So to help bring the economy back up, he passed this $500 billion stimulus that the Republicans didn't want, but at the time, the Senate was even. And so it took his vice president, who is, by a constitution, is the president of the US Senate, Al Gore, to go up to the Senate and actually cast the deciding votes that caused that $500 billion stimulus to pass. That actually helped the country come out of that recession. But also, there was a tech boom, remember, in the mid-70s to the late, in the mid-80s, mid-90s to the late 90s. So that really helped, create a huge economic growth in the country at the time. And then for President Bush Jr., quite a few things happened in his time. First of all, he gave 2 separate tax rebates. Many of you probably got that money and you smiled. But that's because I'm about to show you now, so I'm about to explain to you, there was that budget surplus that happened in the last 5 years approximately of President Clinton's government. So all that surplus, he said, let's give the money back to Americans. It's their money anyways. So he gave us that rebate, but you see, money paid out is money that the government could have kept. And so that is a cost to an opportunity cost to the government. But also the war on terror in Iraq, and to some degree in Afghanistan, but primarily in Iraq. That cost us, and is still costing us, a lot of money. And then don't forget the TARP, the Troubled Assets Relief Program, the $700 billion that he spent to bail Wall Street out. But actually, that turned out to be a good thing, by the way. Government has gotten pretty much all that money back. So, don't tax President Bush or Obama on that one. Under Obama was $800 billion stimulus, and the continuing war in Iraq and Afghanistan that's costing us a whole lot of money. The $800 billion stimulus, though, was actually introduced to Congress when President Bush was still in office. All right, so that's a snapshot. And here's another snapshot of this current situation, where who gives us all this money? Observe that about 1/3 of the money that the United States government borrowed last year actually came from foreigners. And this is one of the troubling aspects of our current national debt, that foreigners do have a significant impact, that the transactions of U.S. debt in the international market does bear a significant impact on our overall well-being, because it's in the hands of non-Americans, primarily in the hands of central banks of other countries and governments of other countries. And we Americans, look over here, it's only about 27% of the total money that we actually lend to the government. And the rest of them are intragovernmental debt. You'll be asking, well, how does government borrow from itself? Well, it's because we have these government units like the Social Security Trust Fund. So that Social Security tax that you paid, what goes into the trust fund, right now, by the way, Social Security, is it broke, yes or no? No, it isn't broke. Social Security is so wealthy. The trust fund is beaming with excess money. That excess, the money we pay into Social Security right now is more than Social Security is paying to retirees, in case you didn't know. The surplus money is borrowed by Uncle Sam to fund our government. That's what happens. So much of this money that you see here is actually money that the United States government borrows from the surplus funds in the Social Security Trust Fund and in the Medicare Trust Fund. So they borrow the money to finance our national budget. It wouldn't quite be until maybe at the very earliest 10 years from now, and some are projecting maybe 20, before the Social Security Trust Fund is broke. Right now, it actually isn't. But as the baby boomers begin to retire, we have a situation. So what I did here was to actually show you an interesting picture, all right? Nothing here is really technical. This is something you can go home and discuss with anybody. Look at that line. Well, all you have to do is look at the broken green line. Look at the fact that the level of money borrowed from foreigners exceeded how much government borrows from us in the early 2000s. But wasn't it the same period that in the first picture I showed you on the global financial crisis, that our debt exceeded our income? That's when things went haywire in America. The housing market is the crucible of the current problem that we're experiencing in America. Because a lot of people talk about the stock market. Do you know that the bond market, which is the market where you lend money to get paid interest, is more than 2 times the size of the stock market? Almost $60 trillion, by the way. So as a result, whenever we have a lot of people lending money, a lot of people borrowing money at very high interest rates that they can't afford, that might well be a little bit of a sign that things are not going to go well. And that's what happened around that time, because now Americans have poured all their money in the housing market, and foreigners say to themselves, oh, wonderful, the US housing market is rising by 60%. Let's go ahead and invest in the market as well. And one of the best ways that they can invest in the US bond market is to buy treasury bonds, because they trust that the United States government will pay them back their money. All US debt is backed by the full faith and credit of the US government. Do you know what that means? Well, it's easy to actually for us to be cynical, and maybe we could afford to be a little bit, but actually what that means is that all US government borrowing is backed by the taxing authority of the government. There is no way I guarantee you, I double guarantee you, for as much as the nicest is different from debt, there's no way the US government can default on its debt. Don't worry about what Congress is doing. They would tax a panhandler sooner than they would let the US government default on its debt. All right, that it's in the law. All right, that's the, what is it, the 14th Amendment or something? They will do that. So everything else that you're seeing is just confusion, by the way. But that's not the truth. But you see how foreigners came into the US debt market, and now they're in charge compared to private citizens within the United States. And of course, China and Japan are the largest lenders of money to the US government. So, here's the big question. Is our national debt out of control? Good question. Well, you know, how many of you, please, by just raising your hand, believe that our national debt is out of control? Just raise your hand. Like I would say that's about 80, 85%. Okay. Well, here's my way of trying to impress upon you how to view it, the answer to that question. If you borrowed $80 and you make $100, can you pay your debt? Your answer is what? Yes, you can pay your debt. All right. If you borrowed $120 and you make $100, can you pay your debt? No, you really can't pay your debt. So you have a debt balance of how much? 20. So next year again, you make 100 and you borrowed 130. You have an additional debt of how much? 30. Plus the 20 you borrowed before, you now have what? 50. You didn't know I was going to do interactive. So, but the 50 you have, what are you going to call that? Your debt. All right? The 20 in the first hand and the 30 in the second hand, those are your deficits, right? But now, the 50, that's your debt balance right now. So now, as someone says, can you really pay off the debt of 50 that you have? I think if you were to come to me and say, hey, Pat, I have a debt situation, can you help me? And I do that a lot, actually. I do various types of debt elimination programs, projects, and workshops for people. And one of the things, the first thing that should come to your mind is, well, let me line up my debt against my income generating ability. Big words. Let me just see whether how much I'm owing can be backed by how much I'm willing to earn, how much I can pull into the household, basically. I mean, if you're simply looking at 50, when in fact You can bring in 200, there's no problem. If you can bring in any amount more than 50, no problem. There's a problem when you can't bring in more than 50. From a national economy standpoint, the ability to pay is going to be tied to how strong our economic performance is. Well, let's take a look at our economy. Look at that. The picture has been very rosy. But look at that hiccup up there, at the top there. What do you think that is? The global financial crisis in 2008, 2009. That's that problem, big problem right there. It's never happened for many years. So now, let's see how these presidents did with respect to our GDP. And as you can see there, President Carter improved our economy by 27%, Reagan by 39%, Bush Sr. by 14%, Clinton by 33%, Bush Jr. by 28%, so far for 1 year, Obama by 4%. Okay. But if you were to tell me, all right, we're now getting into the crux of this floor.